Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint, Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Shane and I am delighted to be joined by Jose Rone, who will be talking to you about the latest from Microsoft Ignite for IT pros. Remember to join the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC17. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you have for Jose in the questions window. Some questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and you will be notified by email when it is available. Don't forget to join us in Dublin from the 13th to the 16th November 2017 for the European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Conference. Since so much happened at Ignite, our tickets are selling fast, so book today at sharepointeurope.com to avoid disappointment. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Jose Rone. Hello, Jose.
Hi, Shane.
How are you today?
I am excellent today.
Brilliant. I've just let you take presentation. Great, so I can see your screen, Jose. Jose, before we get started, I'm just going to ask you one question. What would you say to someone who is thinking about attending ESPC but are not quite sure?
I would say there's two reasons to attend. Number one, it's the biggest event after Ignite in Europe now. So all things SharePoint, Office 365, Azure, you're definitely going to learn those. And the number two reason is you get to visit Dublin, which I think is always good.
Brilliant. Jose, take it away. Thank you for that.
Thank you. So, welcome everyone. I've got a lot of content to cover and I'll make sure to keep this in time. So this is the Ignite 2017 recap. Ignite was last week and I've got a recap of all the IT Pro related announcements, previews, changes that you might be interested in. So quickly before we get started, what is Ignite 2017 and why should you care what Microsoft will announce at Ignite? This year it was the largest Microsoft event of the year and it was held in Orlando, Florida in late September last week. And in total it was 5 days with over 900 sessions basically going through all major Microsoft products and services. We had 4 keynotes. All of those took place on Monday. And I'm going to make the presentation available for you after the webcast, so you will also find the working links from here. Ignite 2017 was 24,000 attendees, and you could really feel it was 24,000 attendees. Even though the venue was really big, the amount of people moving back and forth between the different buildings, that was a massive amount of people. All the session recordings and PowerPoints are available on My Ignite if you have an account in there, and a lot of those session recordings are also available on YouTube if you search for Ignite. So moving on to Ignite for IT Pros. What I tried doing with this presentation is to give you the relevant information without any PR fluff. So if you're in search of really understanding what was relevant from Ignite, what you should keep an eye on for, and what changes will be happening in the coming months, then this presentation aims to bring you answers to all those questions. So let's get started. Out of all of the Ignite sessions, which was about 1,700, when we include all the expo sessions, when we include all of the non-breakout sessions for the week. And out of that 1,700 sessions, about 1,300 were for IT influencers, IT decision makers, and IT pros. And out of those about 1,300 sessions, about 182 were for IT and cloud infrastructure. So cloud was really one of the biggest topics, as you might have guessed. About 119 on security, and a little bit less than 100 on deploying solutions, as well as managing solutions. Most of these sessions are 75 minutes in length, So it means it's about 60 to 75 hours of content if you want to consume all of that. So in the next 45 minutes or so, I aim to give you the biggest highlights out of all of these sessions. Let's see how it goes. So Azure Stack is now generally available since last week's Monday. And if you're not familiar with Azure Stack, it is the Azure deployment that you can deploy in your own data center. It's been available in preview earlier this year, which meant you could download Azure Stack bits and deploy Azure Stack locally in one server. And the requirements for the hardware were fairly high, but now that Azure Stack is available, it means you have to buy it as part of an integrated system. And for now, it's available from Dell EMC, HPE, and Lenovo. And they also announced that Avanade will provide a fully managed solution where they sell you and provide you with the hardware, the software, as well as operations for the device. And as part of Azure Stack, it's really about building hybrid cloud environments. So it provides you the ability to run virtual machines, websites, web services in an on-premises local data center, but also having the hybrid capabilities for the public Azure that you can even use today. They also announced a certification exam for Azure Stack operators. So if you're looking into becoming more capable and more knowledgeable on Azure Stack, you should definitely look into the certification exam as well. The next item we have is Power BI Embedded. And although I do realize Power BI itself is not always the main service that IT pros are working with, I think Power BI Embedded is something that IT pros typically have to understand a bit more about, because it's a solution that we typically use in different projects. So Power BI Embedded is available this week, and it comes available in 3 different offerings. So Power BI, not the embedded, but Power BI, which has been available for a couple of years, is a service, a fully cloud-based service that allows you to visualize and provide intelligence for your data. And with Power BI Embedded, we can now take those reports and dashboards and embed those as part of some other service that we might be managing. So Power BI Embedded EM has a fixed pricing based on capacity. And there's a couple of limitations in there, mainly that you cannot embed reports in Power Apps and or SharePoint Online based services. And Power BI Embedded A has per hour pricing, and this has less limitations, meaning that you can also embed Power BI Embedded A in Power Apps and SharePoint Online. But if you're building a custom web service that you might be hosting in Azure or in your local data center, then you can choose EM or A. And Premium, which was released just before Ignite, has a fixed pricing capacity, and it includes everything that EM and A includes, and it does have a fixed price which is way higher than what you would have with EM or A. SQL Server 2017 is now available for Windows, Linux, as well as a Docker container. And this became available this week as well. And you can download the SQL Server images from MSDN, from my.visualstudio.com, but you can also use it on Azure by provisioning a new virtual machine and selecting the SQL Server 2017 images. And it runs identically on Linux and Windows, which means that if you normally use Windows, you can still use that with SQL Server. But if you have a case where you actually need to use Linux, then you can choose to go with Linux and still have SQL Server running in there. The next item that was announced is Azure Availability Zones. And this was something that wasn't clearly communicated early in Ignite on what this is about. So looking into this more further, the availability zones provide you with fault-isolated locations within a single Azure region. So let's imagine you deploy a virtual machine in West Europe or North Europe Azure data centers. Then you can have high availability with availability sets, which have been available for quite some time now. But with availability zones, what we can now do is to have the fault isolation and tolerance without having a replicated copy of the VM in a different Azure region. So in essence, if you have a virtual machine running that really needs to have a high availability and it needs to recover from faults that at times might happen in Azure data centers, then this is something you need to look into. It's now available for preview in West Europe, meaning the Netherlands, as well as East US 2 data centers. You need to sign up for the preview, and then you can start using it with your existing VMs or by provisioning new VMs as well. The next thing which was announced is Azure Cost Management. Microsoft recently bought a company called Cloudin, and they had a service that allows you to do cost managing and optimization. It works for Azure, Amazon's AWS, and the Google Cloud Platform. And since then, Microsoft announced that it's now called Azure Cost Management, and it will be free of charge for all existing and future Azure customers. So using this, what it allows you to do is to visualize your cloud usage and costs, and also it provides financial insights into how much different services are costing you per month and what's the estimates for this billing period as well. If you've been using Azure as an enterprise agreement customer, you might have been using the Power BI-based estimation. You can still continue using that one too, but what this does is it's an integral part of Azure Portal, so you can use this on the side as well. The one interesting feature in Azure Cost Management, in addition, is the capability of running your workloads in Azure and then comparing the costs against AWS. So if you're thinking of moving workloads from AWS to Azure or vice versa, you can then compare what the estimated costs would be between the two different services. You need to activate this per subscription, and once you activate this, you get a separate portal which allows you to access Azure Cost Management. Next thing in the announcement pipeline is PowerShell support in Azure Cloud Shell. Azure Cloud Shell was released earlier this year, and at the time it only had support for Bash, meaning it was mostly useful for people already coming from a Linux or Unix background. And Azure Cloud Shell can be activated from the Azure portal. In the top right, you will have an icon that activates the Cloud Shell. And Cloud Shell allows you to run command line tools against your Azure workloads and assets. It could be provisioning a new virtual machine, or it could be managing your existing services within Azure. So now with this public preview, we can also use PowerShell to manage and administrate Azure subscriptions and Azure services. And this also works in Azure mobile app. So if you deploy the mobile app and use it on a mobile device, within the mobile app you can activate Azure Cloud Shell using PowerShell and then run PowerShell commands from your mobile device against your Azure subscription. And it's also extensible through PowerShell Gallery. So if you have existing PowerShell scripts from the gallery that you would like to use, you can also access those through the Cloud Shell. A couple of Azure Core Infrastructure updates are available since last week as well. We did get a few virtual machines sizes as part of the virtual machine families. So the M series was released just a bit before Ignite was started, and M-Series is really aimed for virtual machines that need high CPU to RAM ratio. Then we got the B-Series, which is the burstable workloads. And I see this as highly beneficial and useful for scenarios where you run something within a virtual machine that typically only has low utilization. So it could be a database running in a Linux virtual machine, and typically the utilization might be between 1 to 5%. But at times within the same month, you would have updates to the database and you would need more capabilities from the VM. Then you could go with the burstable because the cost is much lower, and the more you use it with low utilization, the more it gives you credits for doing these burstable workloads at times. Then we also got a preview on Azure File Sync, which in essence is the capability of moving your file shares from on-premises Windows servers up to Azure-based storage. Azure Distributed Denial of Service Protection preview is now available, and this is highly useful if you're hosting websites or VMs that host websites within Azure. So if you're getting some sort of denial of service attacks, you can activate the protection and it automatically applies traffic scrubbing that tries to get rid of the attack traffic. Then we also got preview of Azure Databox for transferring really large data sets to Azure. And finally, the Azure Migrate service for migrating existing virtual machines from on-premises to Azure. So this is really the new evolution to the existing Azure migration services. Azure Active Directory pass-through authentication, which has been in preview since December 2016, is now also generally available, meaning that it's ready for production and it is fully supported. So the reason between choosing federated identities using AD Federation Services and Azure AD pass-through authentication has to do with the fact that typically in an ADFS infrastructure, you might need 2 ADFS servers in addition to your existing AD domain controllers, and then you typically need 1 or more proxy servers that act in between the user and the ADFS servers. So this infrastructure typically takes resources for maintaining and troubleshooting possible issues, but it does provide more security when users authenticate against, as an example, to Office 365 workloads. So now with Azure pass-through authentication, we can replace the ADFS infrastructure with a component from Azure AD Application Proxy, which we can drop on AD domain controllers, or if you don't want to deploy anything to domain controllers directly, we can have separate servers hosting the application proxy component. And with this, we can optionally remove the ADFS infrastructure if it's no longer needed, but we can achieve the same type of security, authentication, and authorization for Office 365 workloads for users accessing the services and doing the authentication in real time as well. So this is now out of preview, and I would definitely recommend to look into this if you're currently hosting ADFS-based infrastructure and you feel that pass-through authentication might be a bit more lightweight to get the same results. GDPR compliance, especially in Europe, this has been a hot topic in the past months, and I think it's going to be a hot topic for the next years to come. So Microsoft released 2 sets of white papers, one for Windows 10 and one for Windows Server 2016. These are a huge collection of GDPR-related guidance for deploying Windows 10 and also for deploying and managing Windows Server 2016. So if GDPR is something you need to worry about, and if it's something you need to take into consideration when you deploy either version of Windows, then definitely have a look at these white papers. Windows Server 17.0.0, so this is not Windows Server 2016. This is the new version of Windows Server that will follow Windows Server 2016. And it's now moving to a semi-annual channel release. So we'll get future releases every 6 months. And this same release cadence also applies to System Center products and Windows Server Core, which is really the headless, the non-desktop version of Windows Server. So what's interesting about this is that this is the base preview version of Windows Server for future testing, for future System Center versions, and for managing the upcoming features and understanding what's coming for Windows Server before it's actually coming for Windows Server 2016, or before you move on in the future from 2016 to a newer version. And this is available in Azure, I think this week or next week as a virtual machine if you want to test it out. Also, if you have access to Volume License Center or MSDN subscription, it will be available, I think, next week, so mid-October as well. Next up is Windows Server management changes. Microsoft announced a couple of months back a project Honolulu, which is a web-based management for Windows Server. And this is now in public preview. So you can download this and start managing your Windows 10 workstations, your Windows Server 2016 servers, and your Windows Server 17.09 preview versions. So sadly, this doesn't work for Windows Server 2012 or any of the older workstation versions, but anything that is of the same architecture as Windows 10 and Windows Server 2016 can be managed. So this is a web-based management allowing you to manage a single server or a single workstation, or if you have Hyper-V clusters, you can also use Project Honolulu to manage a bunch of Hyper-V servers or VMs in a cluster mode. There's a lot of deploy guidance for this, so make sure to read through the overview and the guidance before you actually start using this in production. And since it's still in technical preview, I would advise you to really try this in Azure or try this in a VM to see how it works out for you and in your environment. Moving on to co-management. And this is a slight change from Microsoft in terms of managing your Windows 10 devices. So typically larger enterprises are using System Center Configuration Manager to manage workstations, be it Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10, and so on. So now Microsoft introduced a transitioning plan for doing co-management. So all workstations that are joined to a local Active Directory, so they're locally managed, can still be managed with System Center Config Manager. But at the same time with Windows 10, we now have the capability, since Windows 10 Fall Creators Update, to also join those Windows 10 workstations at the same time to Azure Active Directory. So the Windows 10 workstation is simultaneously connected with local AD and Azure AD. And from Azure AD, we can use the Intune service to manage the Windows 10 for all of the modern workloads, as an example, conditional access. And Config Manager can then be used for the same workstation to manage local settings and the settings that the Windows 10 might need in order to work in the local area network. This could be VPN profiles or Windows updates. So this is still in preview, and in order to test this out, you need Config Manager Technical Preview, which follows the 17.09 release cadence together with Windows Server, and then you also need Windows 10 Fall Creators Update. in order to actually have this in a managed fashion. And if you want to try out Windows 10 Fall Creators Update, you need to roll into Windows 10 Insider updates, which have been receiving the same bits for a couple of weeks now. Next up, Microsoft did announce a set of 2019 server releases for on-premises. First off, we are getting Exchange Server 2019. The preview is coming mid-2018, and the final release before end of 2018. There's a TAP program, which is the early adopters program that you can apply into. It does require you to have a locally hosted Exchange in order to be accepted in the program. Then we also get, almost in the same schedule, we also get SharePoint Server 2019. So the release preview is coming mid-2018, and the final release at the second half of 2018. There's no communicated TAP program yet, but I would anticipate something of that sort to become available before the end of this year. And finally, Sky for Business 2019. The release preview will come in mid-2018 and the final release end of 2018 as well. There isn't a TAP program for this either, but the guidance now is to keep an eye on skypreview.com, as they're expecting probably to announce something there in the coming weeks and months. Then we do get a few Windows 10 S devices. Windows 10 S was released June this year as part of the Surface laptop device. And now Windows 10 S is also available from HP, Acer, and Lenovo. So these are devices for what Microsoft calls the first-line workers, people who typically might travel a lot, or people who might not have a fixed seat at the office, and they might not need the most powerful device to get their work done. So as you can see from the prices, they start at $275 up to $350. These are really aimed for modern first-line workers who do Azure AD join with the devices, and management is based on Intune. Availability for the Azure devices, I think, is in the coming weeks, the HP and Lenovo in late 2017. Next up, moving on from Windows Server and Windows 10 to a bit more Office 365 related announcements. The LinkedIn profile data will start flowing to Office 365. So this is coming in October for customers who have the first release setting enabled in their Office 365 tenant. So what this means is that anybody who has a LinkedIn profile, be it the paid version or the free version of LinkedIn, by default, they have the setting that they allow sharing of the data to external services. So with that setting turned on, which means it allows the data to surface in Office 365, Microsoft will start surfacing the data in Outlook on the Web email client at outlook.com, and in the future probably in other Office 365 services as well. The idea here is that if you're sending an email out to somebody you know, but they might not be your colleague in the same company, you might type in their name. Now we can match that person against their LinkedIn profile, and we can enrich the data in the profile card, showing what the user has been up to, and also showing additional details and information, such as when did we get connected on LinkedIn. And the claim is that it will use machine-based learning to match your existing contacts with LinkedIn contacts as well. So all of your existing contacts in your address book might benefit from this as well. If you choose not to have your own personal LinkedIn data to surface in somebody else's Office 365, in a scenario like this, you can go to your privacy settings in LinkedIn and simply disable the third-party permitted services. There's a screenshot on the right on that one, and it's been changing slightly in the past couple of weeks, but this is how it looked yesterday. Next up, a major change and announcement as part of Ignite was Microsoft Teams. So the thinking now is that Microsoft Teams will be the driver for intelligent communications. Before, it was Skype for Business, more or less. So in the future, the Teams client, which has been available since November last year, I think, in preview, and now it's generally available, the Teams client will be the primary client for all intelligent communications. So eventually, Teams client will replace Skype for Business client in instant messages, in voice calls, in conference calls, in screen sharing, and in presence. So Teams in the future will get all of the calling features, including audio conferencing, from Skype for Business, along with new changes as well. So even if you're getting Skype for Business 2019 next year, I think it's more about getting Skype for Business on premises to have the Teams coexistence and hybrid capabilities. So what admins can do in Office 365, you will get a control for selecting between Skype for Business only, Teams only, or both. In the future, I would say it's going to be Teams only for majority of Office 365 customers. So there's no deadline yet if or when you really have to move over to Teams, but the communication for now is clear. The Teams client is really about the future, and Skype for Business is today, but you need to start planning ahead if you're still more on Skype for Business, or if you have disabled Teams or you haven't activated Teams for your users, because Teams client will be the one that in the future gets all the new features and future investments. So this is a big change for a lot of customers, I know, and luckily we do have time since there's going to be a new Skype for Business version as well, but it seems clear now that Teams is really the goal instead of sticking with Skype for Business in the future. There's no panic, but definitely start planning ahead of time how or if or when you're planning to move to Teams. Next up is multi-geo in Office 365. So this is a request that I think people have been asking Microsoft for about 15 years now. How do we expand SharePoint, Exchange, maybe OneDrive for Business? How do we expand that to multiple locations at the same time? Because these products might have clustering or high availability, but the kind of multi-master replication simply isn't there. So now with multi-geo in Office 365, we can expand the presence of services in one tenant to multiple regions. So as an example, if we had a company whose HQ would be in Europe, and they would have a branch office with hundreds of thousands of users in Australia or the US, we could now configure select locations and select users to use the closer Office 365 data center for these services. It seems the implication for now is that this will be an add-on service. So it won't be something that would automatically be enabled, but it would be something you would need to get a separate license. There's no information yet if it's going to be per user or per tenant or a monthly fee or based on traffic, but most probably it will be something that you can get as an add-on. As an example, if you're in Office 365 and you have the E3 license, you can get a lot of different add-ons from the E5 license. So this could also be something that would be part of, say, E5, but you could get it as an add-on for E3. But there's no communication yet on the license details. For now, it's in private preview, so you can contact Microsoft to sign up for the preview. There's no public link, so you need to reach out to your local Microsoft account manager and ask what the requirements are for you to get signed up with the preview. And the availability for now seems to be the first half of 2018. There's also developer guidance on this, as the multi-geo applies to OneDrive for Business, Exchange, SharePoint. So if you're creating custom solutions on top of these cloud-based services, there's a couple of things you need to be aware of in the future if your customers are moving to multi-geo as well. Search, even if it's not probably something that IT pros would typically configure, as you might probably have your search admins who would do that, the search will get a larger overhaul later this year, and as such it will be more personalized. And beneath this personalization is Microsoft Graph, which is the engine behind a lot of Office 365 services today, and for some services in Windows 10 in the future as well. So just keep an eye on this in the coming months, because it will probably affect how search in Office 365 and SharePoint Online will affect your users. Bing for Business also has to do with search. So Bing for Business is a new service, and you can sign up for a private preview. The thinking behind Bing for Business is that when users go to bing.com to do a search, we can surface organizational content from the local Office 365 tenant that the user also has access to. So this is like a hybrid search in the sense that we get public data, but then we also get data from our local Office 365 tenant with all of our organizational content. So you can request a preview, and it does require that you have some sort of license from the E plans or from the First Line Worker plan or one of the Education E5 or Business Essential licenses. Compliance Manager is going to be available for preview in November. This is a new service that gives you a separate dashboard for seeing whether or not you're compliant with a predefined set of requirements. And in the preview, it's going to be supporting GDPR, NIST, and select set of ISO standards as well. And it gives you real-time risk assessments, a list of risks that it's seeing from your data as it relates to these compliance standards. And it also gives you actions that you can do based on this assessment. So it really tries to simplify all of the different compliance requirements with relation to your Office 365 data. And for now, it seems the communication on this is that it's going to be a free service on top of Office 365. In the modern workplace, a lot of new features. Some are smaller, some are larger. So I'm not going to walk through all of these because most of these are self-explanatory. The new SharePoint Admin Center is coming in early 2018. And if you want to get to be part of the preview, there's a link on the right. There's a form you can fill out, and hopefully you'll get access to the Admin Center preview as well. Then there's the SharePoint migration tool, which is free of charge as well, and it's available today. And it helps you migrating content from on-premises file shares and on-premises SharePoint to Office 365 groups and or SharePoint Online. Office 365 groups naming policy is also now available in preview. And this is something that many IT pros have been asking for. When users create new Office 365 groups, they typically don't have a clue on what kind of naming policy they should be following. Now IT pros can set the prefix and optionally the suffix of the group name. There's an example that if you want to have the prefix as something as company name, underscore, group name, and then the suffix could be something like Europe or IT or public or what have you. You also have the possibility of using custom blocked words, so you can have a list of words that users cannot use in the group name at all. And in order to start using this, you need to install the Azure Ready Preview PowerShell module. There's the command in there, so you just use install module. And then this applies to all group workloads. So this includes Exchange, Planner, Teams, SharePoint Online, so all of the workloads that are part of Office 365 groups as well. And this is applied to group names as well as the group aliases, so the internal names as well. Just keep in mind that for the prefix, suffix, there's a max string length of 53 characters. I don't know why it's 53, but for now it's good for you to know that there's a limit really for the name as well. And with that, I think we did go through all of the 5 days of announcements for IT pros. There's a lot of additional announcements for developers and for SQL professionals, but this was really about the IT Pro related announcements. And as you could see, it was at Ignite, it was less about Windows 10 and Windows Server, and it was more about Azure and Office 365. So, Shane, do we have any questions from the audience yet?
We do indeed, Jose. I have one here. It is the goal of multi-geo data compliancy regulation or performance gain for the branch office, or maybe both?
It's not performance. It's really about the having the data in the correct region. As you might have guessed, we are getting the final GDPR requirements in May next year. So many companies are looking into how can they restrain select set of data to be in the EU area. So the multi-geo is really about the having the data reside in a desired data center of Office 365 infrastructure. It doesn't bring anything for performance for now.
Great. Okay. And that is our only question so far, Jose. Thank you so much for an absolutely super presentation.
Thank you. And we'll make sure to also share the slides so everybody who attended and who are looking at the recording will also get all of the links in the slides as well.
That's super, Jose. If you can send it on to me, I'll make sure I share it to everybody else.
Will do.
Thank you, Jose. Okay, so that is it for now. Just bear with me here for one moment. That is it for now. Join us tomorrow for our final Ignite Roundup webinar, which is happening on Friday, October 6, 2017 from 2 to 3 p.m. CEST, when we will have a post-Ignite questions and answers wrap-up for business users in a fireside chat with Sue Hanley and Jennifer Mason. That is it for today. Thank you all for attending and have a great day.